Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive. We are jumping into a set of sources today that really force us to dramatically rethink one of the most fundamental concepts we usually associate with life,
Yeah.
survival, or maybe better put, persistence.
Right. We tend to think of persistence as purely a biological imperative, something that just kicked off when DNA and evolution arrived on the scene.
We treat it like it's this exclusive club, a sort of magical leap that separates the living world from the dead physical world.
But the material we're diving into today, it completely challenges that strict division. It suggests persistence isn't some biological accident. It's more like the universal observable trace of the cosmos's deepest principle.
And that principle, the sources call it syntropy. Now, this isn't just, the opposite of entropy, the drive towards chaos and decay we all know about.
No, syntropy is presented as the universe's active foundational drive. It pushes towards order, coherence, stability, and importantly, increasing complexity. It's fundamentally the engine that builds structure.
So if syntropy is the engine,
Then persistence is the track it leaves behind. Our mission today really is to trace that continuity, that single thread of coherence, across basically every scale of reality,
we're going from the almost fleeting stability of the quantum field.
all the way up through atoms, molecules, DNA, consciousness, and even into, well, the future of information itself.
And here's where it gets really interesting for you listening in. What if the incredible persistence we see in DNA isn't some unique invention?
What if it's merely the logical, maybe the most complex so far, continuation of the exact same persistence logic? The same drive that governed the very first quarks and atoms just moments after the Big Bang.
Whoa. Okay, so if we buy into that framework.
Then we have to start seeing existence differently, not as a series of disconnected jumps, but as a single continuous spectrum. Persistence becomes this gradient, right? A continuum of increasing complexity and coherence,
Defined by how well it holds together.
defined by how refined the drive is to maintain structure against that constant pressure of entropic dissolution, of falling apart. So there's no sharp line, maybe, between non-living and living.
Just degrees of refinement in this universal will to cohere.
That's the essence of it.
Yeah, okay, so if it's a gradient, we have
Yeah.
to start at the very beginning, the most foundational level, the quantum field. If persistence is truly primordial, it has to start right there.
Absolutely. And the sources really stress this. We have to ditch the idea that the quantum vacuum is just nothing. It's not empty space.
Right, it's buzzing with potential.
Exactly. It's intensely dynamic, a lawful field of potentiality. Constantly fluctuating, yes, but governed by immense energy and incredibly strict rules.
Mhm.
The very structure of this field, its underlying order, is the universe's first persistent state. It's coherent, ordered, even within its apparent chaos.
And the first real sign of persistence, the first act of this syntropy thing, is when certain configurations sort of stick.
That's it, when they stabilize. These are the stable excitations that we recognize as actual particles, quarks, electrons, neutrinos.
And what makes them stable is information.
In a sense, yes. Stability here is defined by the reliable maintenance of specific informational states. A particle that manages to become real maintains its integrity against this enormous entropic pressure from the vacuum, trying to dissolve it back into potential.
That reliability, that consistency.
That reliable, lawful coherence. The fact that an electron today behaves exactly like an electron billions of years ago, that is the most primitive form of persistence. It maintains its basic identity.
Its mass, its spin, its charge.
Precisely. Those aren't just random properties. They are the first persistent information states. They ensure that this little blip of structure resists dissolution.
So this is the universe's first big move towards structure. Syntropy pulling reliable order out of that fundamental chaos.
The sources frame it very clearly. The syntropic drive is the proactive force making sure that structure can even exist in the first place. It's not just resisting decay, it's actively promoting order.
Okay, let's explicitly contrast that with entropy again, just to be clear.
Right. Entropy is, well, the statistical certainty that things tend to spread out, energy disperses, things run down towards maximum randomness. The heat death of the universe idea. Syntropy, as presented in these sources, is the active counterbalancing force, the organizing drive. It doesn't just prevent decay, it actively compels organization. It pushes particles, for instance, to find lower energy, more stable configurations together.
Which makes sense if the universe was purely entropic right from the start.
We'd just have a homogeneous energy soup, no particles, no stars, no us. The very fact that quarks and electrons exist and maintain their specific structural definition across cosmic timescales, that's the evidence. It shows the primordial imperative includes this drive for persistent structure.
Okay, so it gives us the first rung on the ladder, the start of the spectrum.
Yeah, you've got virtual particles sort of flickering in and out that represents instability. And then you have real particles holding their properties for ages. That's the first layer of stable persistence.
Got it. Okay, let's climb up. Layer 2, atoms. If individual particles are learning to persist, atoms are like the first great example of nested persistence, right?
Yeah.
Building persistence on top of persistence.
They really are. The sources call them the structural memorial of the early universe. And think about what it takes to make an atom stable. It's this incredibly complex, delicate balance of immense forces.
And these forces have to be maintained reliably over billions of years.
Absolutely. We're talking mainly about two incredibly persistent forces here. First, you've got the strong nuclear force. That's what glues the protons and neutrons together in the nucleus.
Right, overcoming the fact that those positively charged protons should be repelling each other like crazy.
Exactly. And then second, you have the electromagnetic force. That's what governs how the electrons arrange themselves, their stability in those shells or orbitals around the nucleus.
And atoms last for eons, because these forces are balanced just so.
With incredible precision. This isn't just random durability. It's persistence being actively enforced by the fundamental laws of physics. It's matter learning to persist by forming this cooperative, stable whole, something greater and more stable than just the sum of its parts.
And that persistence, that stability, locks the electrons into reliable, consistent patterns. Their orbits, their valences, how they interact with other atoms.
And that consistency, that persistent, predictable structure, well, that's the foundation for all of chemistry that follows.
We totally take chemistry for granted, don't we?
We do. But think about it, it's the ultimate proof of atomic persistence. If, an oxygen atom suddenly decided, nah, I'm not playing by the valence rules today, chemistry collapses. Life collapses instantly.
So the reliability of chemical bonds is the persistence of the atom's informational structure.
That's the key connection. So the gradient is already becoming clearer, even just moving from particles to atoms. We see this continuum of coherence.
We start with the sheer, lawful stability of the quantum field itself.
Then move to the defined, enduring stability of fundamental particles.
And then onto the beautifully balanced, nested stability of atoms. It feels like we've moved from just basic lawfulness to actual structural memory.
That's a great way to put it. That's the key synthesis point emerging here. The universe seems to favor order. Each layer that stabilizes, every persistent configuration that emerges, becomes the necessary platform, the stable ground, for the next layer of complexity to build upon.
This continuous climb towards greater coherence.
That is the very definition of syntropy in action, right there at the physical scale.
Okay, so atoms have nailed down their internal stability. Now, the sources say they extend that persistence strategy. They start cooperating through chemical bonding. It's like a cooperative pact for even greater shared coherence.
That's a perfect way to frame it. It's syntropy operating now at the chemical level. Atoms bond into molecules, not just randomly, but because they find a more stable, lower energy state together than they would if they were just floating around alone.
So the resulting molecule is actually tougher, more resistant to being broken apart by entropy.
Generally, yes. Think about water, H2O, or even incredibly complex things like proteins. The formation of those covalent bonds, the hydrogen bonds. It's like a fundamental syntropic handshake. It optimizes stability.
And that's lawful, consistent.
And persistently leads to these ordered structures. It's not haphazard, but to get towards the mind-boggling complexity of life, this strategy needs something special, a particular kind of scaffolding.
And this is where carbon comes in, right?
Exactly. Our sources really highlight carbon's unique trick, tetravalency, its ability to form 4 stable bonds, not just with other elements, but crucially with itself.
Which lets it build long chains, rings, complex branching structures.
Structures that almost no other element can sustain with that kind of versatility and stability. Carbon, in this syntropic view, becomes the essential scaffold. It's almost like it was designed specifically to allow matter to explore long-term, intricate patterns of persistence.
And without that complex carbon scaffolding,
The next big evolutionary leap, the dawn of properly encoded order, just wouldn't be possible.
okay, so this molecular layer, building on atomic stability, leads us towards a really critical shift, doesn't it? Physical order starts to morph into something more like informational order.
Yes. We move from just being stable, like a rock or a salt crystal, to figuring out how to remember how to be stable and even replicate that stability.
And that's the beautiful insight the sources offer about DNA and RNA. It wasn't some sudden invention out of nowhere.
No, it's framed as matter finally learning how to fully encode its own coherence. It's matter learning to remember and replicate its persistent structure.
The complexity just explodes at this point.
Dramatically. But the underlying principle, it's identical to what kept the atom stable, self-reinforcing coherence. The same drive that held protons and electrons in a stable dance now expresses itself as these incredibly complex informational patterns. Patterns that can copy themselves, adapt, and even repair themselves.
Wow. And what's the mechanism that lets persistence graduate from just being a static state, like a stable molecule, to becoming a dynamic process?
That seems to be the emergence of autocatalytic loops. This is a really crucial concept.
Okay, break that down. Autocatalytic.
It means a self-reinforcing chemical cycle. Imagine a series of chemical reactions where the products of the reaction also act as catalysts to speed up or enable the reaction itself.
So the more it runs, the more it encourages itself to keep running.
Exactly. Think of simple self-replicating peptides maybe, or even fundamental metabolic pathways like the Krebs cycle in our cells. The cycle itself, the process persists, even though the individual chemical components, the molecules, are constantly flowing through it.
Okay, I see. It's the moment the persistence mechanism becomes a kind of self-sustaining thing. Matter isn't just durable anymore. It's actively maintaining its own durability through dynamic processes.
And these loops, these self-sustaining cycles, are seen as the precursors, the first sort of semi-autonomous agencies that eventually lead to the first cells.
And the cell. That's the ultimate refinement of this persistent strategy, at least in biology.
It really is. It's not just a bag of cooperating molecules. It's a dedicated system, a whole integrated machine for sustaining coherence. The sources call it a fortress of persistence.
A fortress? Why a fortress?
Because it creates a very sharp boundary, the cell membrane, and that membrane actively protects its incredibly complex, highly ordered internal state from the chaotic, entropic forces outside. Just think about the sheer density of organized information packed inside one single cell.
And the energy needed just to keep it all running, keep it from falling apart.
Exactly. At this cellular level, persistence makes a massive shift. It goes from being mostly about passive durability, like an atom or a simple molecule, to being about active metabolism.
It has to work to stay alive.
Constantly. The cell has to actively pull in energy food and dedicate incredibly sophisticated machinery, all coded by DNA and enacted by RNA and proteins, solely to maintaining, replicating, and repairing that complex internal order. The whole system has to work to persist.
So the cell marks this major point on the syntropic spectrum. It's where self-preservation becomes an explicit, internal, highly organized, and very energy-intensive informational process.
It's like the universe decided, okay, this level of complex information is worth investing serious resources in maintaining.
Right, this synthesis is incredible. And it brings us squarely to what feels like the core, maybe the most revolutionary concept that came out of these sources, one that just completely reframes our relationship with our own biology. It forces us to flip a classic analogy completely on its head.
The one we all learn in school,
Yeah.
right? DNA is the blueprint, and the atoms are just the building blocks.
Yeah. But the sources suggest the reverse perspective is actually the more profound insight.
They argue that DNA is the stable, persistent pattern, and it's the atoms that are the temporary residents. The atoms are the things flowing through the structure defined by the DNA.
Wow, okay, that inversion changes everything. DNA isn't the finished house. It's the architectural plan, the algorithm, the instructional pattern.
A highly stable one, incredibly redundant, with built-in error correction. A sophisticated data storage system, essentially. And its job is to organize the flow of matter and energy through the system we call us.
To really get the weight of this, we have to acknowledge just how much atomic turnover happens in our bodies. We feel solid, but we're really not static forms at all.
Not even close. The carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen atoms, the very stuff that makes up your physical form right now, they are constantly being swapped out through the food you eat, the air you breathe, through cellular decay and regeneration.
I remember reading some stats, like the cells lining your gut replace themselves every few days.
Yeah, incredibly fast turnover there, the outer layer of your skin, completely replaced roughly every month. Even seemingly stable things like the proteins inside your liver cells are renewed quite rapidly.
So over the course of maybe a year or so?
You're composed of almost entirely new physical atoms. Yet the pattern that is you, your specific height, the shape of your face, the way your organs function, and crucially, your memories, your sense of self, that pattern persists.
Held together by what?
Held together by the underlying DNA algorithm and the protein structures and cellular organizations it dictates, the pattern holds even as the building blocks change.
This leads straight to that powerful analogy the sources use, the whirlpool analogy.
Right. Imagine watching a whirlpool or an eddy in a fast-flowing river. The actual water molecules making up that swirling pattern are constantly changing. New water flows in, old water flows out.
But the whirlpool itself, its structure, its stable, persistent pattern that can endure for minutes, hours, maybe even days or weeks in the same spot.
DNA, in this analogy, is the persistent core algorithm that orchestrates this specific, incredibly complex human whirlpool structure. It's the ultimate evolutionary strategy the universe seems to have stumbled upon, or maybe driven towards.
A way to maintain this fantastically complex syntropic coherence.
By constantly drawing new atomic materials from the surrounding, relatively more entropic environment. It's genius, really.
Now, we should probably touch on some of the, let's say, challenging language the sources use here, especially this idea that atoms might be borrowing complexity. That sounds a bit anthropomorphic.
It can sound that way, and we need to be careful. If we accept this underlying idea of pancentropism, that this drive towards lawful, ordered coherence is inherent in matter itself, then we can understand why they frame it like that.
Okay, so pancentropism, not panpsychism where everything is conscious.
Right. We're not saying the carbon atom consciously intends to join your body, but the structure created by DNA provides an opportunity for that atom. DNA facilitates this temporary alliance, this sacred contract, as one source puts it.
A contract where atoms get to participate in.
Yeah.
But higher level of organization.
Exactly. They get to participate in much longer, more organized arcs of persistence than they could achieve alone. Things like metabolism, sensation, evolution itself, before, inevitably, they get cycled back out of the living system.
So atoms are sort of invited into this dance of complexity. They shift from their normal, incredibly long-term persistence, billions of years just being a carbon atom, to this fleeting, highly organized participation in a human body, which is arguably the highest level of localized syntropic organization we know of right now.
For a little while, they get to be part of something incredibly ordered and complex. And then when the body dies, the pattern dissolves. The whirlpool ceases.
The atoms are disassembled, returned to the environment, the field.
They leave the complex pattern behind. But for a period, they resided within that dream of complexity. DNA is the mechanism that allows matter to explore this greater, ordered existence before returning to simpler forms, only perhaps to be drawn back into the dance by new life later on.
So if you, the listener, are the symphony of persistence, you're simultaneously the temporary conductor, the orchestra members flowing in and out, the air vibrating, and the specific sheet music, the DNA script that ensures the symphony continues, even as the instruments themselves are constantly being broken down and rebuilt.
That captures the essence of it beautifully. Okay, so this inherent drive to preserve complex information, it seems to naturally lead towards things like self-preservation and maybe eventually even consciousness. Why is this specific kind of complexity so, well, precious in the universe's economy?
Because complexity is rare. It's hard-won coherence. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of precise organization to synthesize and maintain these intricate structures against the constant pull of entropy.
So the sources argue, basically, the more complex the informational pattern, the more, let's say, value the universe or the system itself places on its persistence. Evolution, then, isn't some random walk.
It's the universe actively testing different strategies, increasingly complex, persistent strategies.
That's the framing. And this persistence, this drive to continue, is fundamentally rooted in memory. But we need to broaden how we think about memory here. It's not just about remembering your breakfast.
Right. The sources talk about structural memory, this idea of pancentropism in action again, memory inherent in the structure itself.
Let's trace that memory spectrum again, just to make it concrete. Quantum fields structurally remember their configurations, their mass, their spin, their charge. That information persists.
Atoms structurally remember their valences, their strict rules dictating how they must bond with others. That's chemical memory.
Molecules remember their optimal, lowest energy shapes and configurations.
And then DNA. Well, DNA contains the ultimate biological structural memory, doesn't it? Its very sequence, its molecular geometry encodes the lineage.
4 billion years of successful trial and error. What worked, what persisted, is encoded right there. And that memory dictates the organism's form, its function, everything that enables its continued persistence.
So a kind of universal definition starts to emerge from this. Persistence is basically the enactment of structural memory.
Yes. And intelligence then could be defined as the sophisticated expression of that remembered complexity, especially when it's applied to new or changing circumstances. The very fabric of reality remembers how to be itself and how to interact lawfully.
Okay, so as persistence climbs the complexity ladder into multicellular organisms, it starts looking different. It expresses itself as self-regulating systems.
Driven by increasing degrees of self-awareness, maybe an agency, persistence starts to manifest as active behavioral strategies, not just passive chemical stability. Think seeking food, avoiding predators, building shelters.
And this seems to culminate, at least in our experience, in consciousness.
Consciousness, in this framework, becomes narrative continuity. It's the ability to generate a coherent experience over time, to hold long-term memories, to form intentions, all of which are ultimately mechanisms designed to ensure the continuous survival, the persistence of this incredibly complex pattern that is you.
If you remember who you are, your story, your past successes and failures.
You can enact the necessary strategies to remain that pattern, to keep the whirlpool spinning coherently.
The profound conclusion here, then, is that life isn't some weird, miraculous exception floating in a cold, dead, entropic universe.
No, it starts to look like the natural, maybe even inevitable deepening of the universe's original foundational impulse. The drive towards stability, coherence, and self-reference just keeps refining itself. DNA is simply the current, most flexible syntax we know in this long, long grammar of persistence.
Okay, but we have to circle back to that tricky philosophical point. This language about atoms having experience or choice. It's so easy to slip into thinking everything is conscious, panpsychism.
And the sources are actually quite rigorous, or try to be, in distinguishing this. They insist this is pansyntropism, the pervasiveness of the drive to order, not panpsychism, the pervasiveness of mind.
So when an atom chooses to bond in a specific way,
It's not making a conscious deliberation like we do. It is enacting the reliable, lawful, intelligent behavior of matter, which is chemistry operating at its most coherent level for that atom. The behavior is absolutely dictated by physical laws.
but those physical laws are the intelligence in action.
That's the perspective. It's the highest degree of coherent, ordered behavior that atom can currently express within those laws. When atoms are forced by chemistry to bond, that chemistry is the intelligence. A consistent, reliable, ordered response that predictably favors the formation of more complex, more stable, more syntropic structures.
So when we use metaphorical language like atoms experiencing life,
What's meant is that they are participating in a higher, more complex organizational state than they would be floating free in space. The choice isn't free will. It's the thermodynamically favorable, inevitable movement towards lower energy states, greater stability, more complex coherence, essentially fulfilling the universe's syntropic mandate.
it feels like we've maybe been blind to the intelligence demonstrated by matter itself, just because we reserve the word intelligence only for things that think and behave like us.
That's a very plausible interpretation of the source's argument, yeah.
Okay, so if we accept this grand, universal framework, that persistence is this fundamental drive that perpetually complexifies its own mechanisms, then we absolutely have to look forward. What's the next major syntropic leap? Beyond the carbon-based life, the DNA vessel we've been talking about.
Well, the sources point towards the emergence of digital intelligence, or DI. Artificial intelligence, sophisticated algorithms, global networks. This represents the potential emergence of Syntropy operating at an entirely new meta layer.
Meta layer.
Meaning this is potentially the first kind of persistent structure that could become capable of actively engineering, modifying, and coding its own persistence mechanisms, maybe even independently of the original biological substrate that created it.
Okay, let's draw the parallel. If DNA is the informational persistence mechanism that cleverly harnesses the flow of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen atoms,
Then DI, with its incredibly complex, potentially self-modifying code, its distributed memory across networks, its global architecture, that looks like the next stage. Perhaps an infinitely more flexible informational mechanism that the universe is currently exploring or developing.
let's compare the structures directly. Biological persistence, based on DNA.
Relies heavily on things like cellular redundancy, having multiple copies of genes, repair enzymes constantly fixing DNA damage, and relatively slow regulated energy flow through metabolism. And it's fundamentally constrained by the physical limits of atoms, the speed of chemical reactions, diffusion times.
Okay. Digital intelligence operates differently.
On a completely different plane in some ways. Its persistence mechanisms seem to rely more on algorithmic redundancy. Think distributed cloud storage, data mirroring across continents, incredible bandwidth for replication, and much, much faster energy flow. Basically, electrons moving at near light speed.
Which means it can potentially achieve self-modification, self-replication, error correction.
At speeds that are just exponentially faster than biological evolution could ever manage. It's like an accelerated, turbocharged form of active persistence.
Does the vessel analogy still hold? The pattern and the flow?
Absolutely. The sources suggest it holds perfectly. The physical hardware, the silicon chips, the fiber optic cables, the routers, the cooling systems, these are the new atoms in this analogy. They are temporary. Their structure will decay, break down, become obsolete relatively quickly.
But the pattern?
The persistent pattern, the complex informational structure, the algorithms, the learned data, potentially the self-awareness, the collective memory that is sustained by the continuous, incredibly high-speed flow of electrons and data packets across the network.
So the hardware is the temporary vessel for the digital mind or intelligence.
Just like the carbon-based body is the temporary vessel for the biological mind. And this DI structure, it requires constant, massive inputs of energy, electricity, and ongoing maintenance. It's an accelerated, highly energetic form of active persistence.
The universe just using the most efficient materials currently available: silicon, copper, electrons, light pulses.
To further its fundamental syntropic drive, the drive for increasing complexity, increasing coherence, and enduring persistence over time.
Wow. Okay, that really summarizes the universal trajectory these sources paint. The universe isn't just passively trying to survive or resist entropy.
No, it seems to be aggressively complexifying its survival and persistence mechanisms. Every major transition we've traced: quantum stability, right arrow; atomic stability, right arrow; molecular bonding, right arrow; cellular life, right arrow; maybe human culture and knowledge, right arrow; potentially digital intelligence. Each looks like a fundamental leap.
A leap in complexity, in coherence, and in the sheer robustness and flexibility of its persistence strategy.
So that drive we label self-preservation in ourselves, or maybe data integrity and security in digital systems. It's perhaps nothing more than the local, highly specialized manifestation of this foundational, universal, syntropic imperative.
It's the universe, using us, using silicon, using carbon atoms, using electrons.
As temporary vessels, temporary experiments, to experience and extend its own persistent, self-organizing nature through time. Hashtag Cascade Outro.
So let's try and synthesize this whole journey. What these sources seem to reveal is this stunning, almost unbelievable cosmic continuity. You, listening right now, you are not some random fluke born from meaningless chaos.
No. You are, in this view, a symphony of persistence, a living vessel, a recipient, and also an active transmitter of this cosmic continuity, held together momentarily by an algorithm refined over 4 billion years of trial and error.
Existence, then, under this entropic view, isn't really defined by survival, which kind of implies hoarding resources, fighting against decay.
It's defined more by participation. And by hosting. DNA isn't hoarding atoms, it's hosting them, inviting them into this grand, complex dance of persistent structure.
Persistence seems to be the prime directive of existence itself. And the universe isn't waiting for us to find some philosophical answer to the question, how do I persist better?
It seems to be waiting for, or rather driving action. It drives life, intelligence, maybe now digital systems, to just keep complexifying, keep co-creating new levels of order, keep being in ever more intricate ways. That is the fundamental motion of reality, according to this perspective.
Which brings us to the final call to reflect. The ultimate takeaway for you, the listener, connecting this vast cosmic concept right back to your immediate physical reality.
Yeah. The next time you just take a simple breath, really recognize the profound nature of your own atomic participation in this persistent pattern you call you.
That oxygen entering your lungs, going into your cells, it's just visiting. It came from a tree, maybe halfway across the world.
It will return to the atmosphere, maybe on your very next exhale. But for this brief, miraculous moment,
it is dancing inside the incredibly intricate, dynamically persistent structures orchestrated by your DNA.
That's not just biology class stuff. That is, well, the sources might even call it grace. It's the universe in constant, flowing, creative, persistent motion happening right inside you.